Hello, all you Total Annihilation Kingdoms fans out there. I am Blecky. You might remember that name from way back when in the Boneyards days. That's what I played as. I was also Shadow 3 on M-Player. And I am lucky enough to be here with Clayton Kauzlaric, the lead artist on Total Annihilation and the lead designer on both Total Annihilation Kingdoms and Iron Plague. How are you doing today, Clayton?
I'm doing well. Nice to see you.
Yeah, on behalf of all of us, it's just so exciting to talk to you. You have this blog, Ton of Clay, blogspot.com, where you talk a lot about the evolution of Total Annihilation, but we don't really get to, I don't think you have talked too much about the evolution of Kingdoms, right?
Not a whole lot. You know, it's a funny thing. I just think historically, and I'm sure this is no surprise, there's been more interest in Total Annihilation, and so I know that sometimes feeling that Kingdoms is the red-haired step cousin, whatever, I'm not phrasing that very well, but it's a sort of thing where I think about it sometimes, but I just haven't really thought about like what is the story I would tell, what is the stuff that I'd want to talk about. I have really no idea what anyone would be interested in for the game. It's funny. When we were kind of warming up earlier, I was saying that I hadn't looked at some things, I hadn't dug up some things, or things, there's documents I haven't seen since 20 years ago. So it is odd. I'm so amazed and pleased and flattered that anyone plays anything I work on.
Because it's not just like a couple people. There's a whole community around it,
That's,
and a very active.
I don't believe you. That can't be true.
I swear. It's really, really cool stuff. So, thank you for joining, and I'm just so excited to talk about it today. And actually, you're a kind of a games industry veteran. Even before your work with Cave Dog, I was reading on your blog you were with Squaresoft, right?
Yeah.
Any cool titles you worked on there?
There was only really one, although there is a funny side story, and I think I get into it a little bit in my blog, and that is we made Secret of Evermore. The point there was to make something akin to Secret of Mana, but more American. They wanted like an American studio with American sensibilities and writing styles and snarky sarcasm and stuff to make a game in that kind of classic Squaresoft, awesome action RPG ring menu style. And we did. But there was this time afterwards where they were not sure what to do when transitioning out of the 16-bit cartridge era and into 3D. So they plunked big SGI workstations down on everybody's desks so we could all learn 3D. and suddenly overnight, our skill sets were kind of like out the window. A lot of us were learning new stuff. But among the things we were doing was a whole mess of prototyping of stuff. And there was this one contingent in the office at Squaresoft in Redmond that wanted to make an RTS game because Command and Conquer and Warcraft were like just crushing it, and everyone loved those games. So we started on very early prototyping and some tools and some ideas. And so I was doing some like really rough mock-ups of some things and thinking about how I would go about building terrain and stuff like that, mostly from an artistic perspective. Some of the prototyping work we did, some of the people who were working on it all ended up actually going just a few miles further down the slough, the Sammamish River. To Woodinville, Washington, where we of course all worked on Total Annihilation. So I that definitely contributed to some of what were the sort of underpinnings of Total Annihilation as well.
That's awesome. So if anyone out there wants to read about the Total Annihilation journey, as I mentioned, check out Ton of Clay Blogspot. You do talk about that a lot. So I kind of want to fast forward to as just the idea of some kind of, whether you want to call it a sequel or a spiritual successor to Total Annihilation, was starting to percolate. Let's just go to that moment of who on the team was basically saying, this is a real success. Why not make another game?
Oh yeah, like in the wake of Total Annihilation, like what we did there. It was interesting because there was a lot of soul searching going on at that point. The game had done well, could have done actually better. It's perceived as a big hit. But of course, when you see the numbers by today's standards, it's charming, charmingly small. And then the idea that, oh, you get an audience that is devoted, and we didn't even know what we had in some weird ways, right? I mean, today, when I work in the game industry still, and we talk all the time about games as a service, GAS, GAAS, And weirdly, we were doing it 20 years ago. We just didn't know what that was, and much less how to make money on it. But the idea that the game stays out in the world, it evolves, it changes over time. It becomes, in a way, a sandbox for people to goof around in. We didn't even think of it that way. We didn't even know that that's what that. I mean, we were aware of the longevity of the game being extended by people building stuff of their own, of fans making their own units and maps and things like that, and we were just amazed by that. But I mean, I think that was a point where the whole industry really didn't know what to do with something like that. That was so strange and different. So we thought about what we wanted to do. We felt that a TA2 would be great, but it would be difficult to do with the engine we had. I mean, I think if we just kept revving that and putting out more content, a lot of TA fans would have been really happy. But as creators and people who always like to be trying things and building new things and different things, we wanted to do something a little different, because we figured, well, what else can we do with these tools? What else can we do with these pieces we have in play that could still leverage what we're doing, not push it so far that we have to scrap the whole engine, but enough that we can do something significantly different. And that we had some goals for things that maybe we wanted to. Again, I think you allude to this in other areas of it'd be nice to have a little more story. It'd be nice to have more of a world with characters and things like that. We did get some knocks for the TA story, which I went home and wrote one evening. And I mean, that was it, though. I mean, Chris and I would jokingly say we don't need no stinking story, when we were working on the game. And yeah, I mean, I think, well, the fact is we couldn't afford a story. I mean, I storyboarded all kinds of stuff. There's also some of that's on my blog. But so there were these ideas that we could do some things that we maybe couldn't do with Total Annihilation, along the lines of the content and the story and the world and things like that. I mean, in retrospect, I'd say my big confession, or the thing that I don't think I've ever really talked about, is there was a fair amount of pressure to stick the Total Annihilation name right on there. Because, it's like, the press will like it, and marketing people will like it, and retailers will like it. The more I think back on what we built, I feel like it would have probably been better for Kingdoms to have been its own game, to not feel like it's piggybacking on something, because we didn't want to feel like we were disrespecting the thing we had built before, because we all just killed ourselves working on both games. But there was that sense of, well, this is our identity. And then there was the logistical need of why are we building this? What do we need? Because the idea is that we would maybe start all over, build a proper TA2. We actually started prototyping in full 3D. We actually had a world, that actually had perspective. It was all rendered, but it couldn't get much further than having trees on it. Right. It just wasn't possible on the hardware. I mean, yeah, it was possible, but I mean, to get something that would run well for a lot of people, really difficult. So we felt, okay, whatever a true TA2 is down the road. And then there was this little bit of pressure, like I said, this logistical stuff going on, because as you may know, there were other projects afoot in the studio, and they were running late. They were delayed, and so there was this yawning gap where there were no games. There was nothing coming out. So again, back to the drawing board of what can we do with the stuff we have that would be fun and cool and interesting to work on. The team, frankly, a lot of the artists and other people had been making robots for 2 years. So what would be fun and entertaining for them as well? Because I mean, I know it's selfish to say, but making the team excited for the content and other things like that, just having a little breather, taking a break, doing something new or different was really important to us. And I don't think I've ever told the story of the day Kingdoms, like as a notion, sort of popped up. But that was I went out with Ron Gilbert on his plane. And I'd never been on a
plane day trip.
Small. I've never been out on an airplane, like a private airplane, like a little prop plane, prop plane. And I'm not the greatest flyer ever, but it was kind of fun and cool. And we take off from Boeing Field near Seattle, and we're flying out around Puget Sound, and we're looking down on it. So that was just great. But there was this terrible wind shear as we were landing, and all the stall alarms were going off, and Ron lands and everything seems fine, but he turns to me afterwards and he says, that was really, really scary. You have no idea. And so there's this like, oh my God, did we just die? We almost died. So I think we were just babbling in the car. We had all this adrenaline from, I guess, wind shear, and then the notion of taking a fantasy theme and seeing what we could do with that, with the kind of tools we have, the kinds of editors we had, and the kinds of tech we had. And it all kind of snowballed as we were talking. And I think by the time I got home, it was like sort of like a done deal. Yeah, we're going to do this thing. We're going to do a fantasy game.
Yeah.
And, sorry, that was the very roundabout way of answering your question.
That's. I mean, I would have never. If you had told me that, if someone had told me that the idea for using a fantasy theme came from an almost plane crash, I would not have believed them. So, I'm very much glad that.
I don't think I had. Again, I don't think I've ever told that story. So, enjoy.
Yeah. Okay, so you had this idea. You knew that you wanted a fantasy theme. How close to the original gameplay, like, and not just like in that moment, but as it evolved, how close to the original gameplay did you feel like you wanted to make this game? The original gameplay of TA.
We wanted the scope. We wanted the idea that you could have epic battles with just many units. I mean, that was a calling card definitely for TA as well, and still the thing that people either love or hate about the style of the game. We liked the kind of fluidity of how things worked. We liked the idea that I mean, certainly I think a lot of the innovations of TA are even things that maybe are not as recognized as they could be, like shift click. I mean, I know saying that, like, I think most people, if they heard me say that today, was like, what? But RTS fans know. I mean, the idea that you could actually queue up things and do to a crazy extent. There were things like that really impacted how TA was played, that we felt we had to absolutely keep, when we were working on Kingdoms. I mean, that said, we also said, well, hey, maybe we don't need 300 units. Also, the notion of the download units and their role, we felt could be more meaningful. We felt the idea that if we didn't necessarily put every last gap in the framework in, and leave some room for things to kind of grow and shift or change or evolve, that it would long term help the game. So that's why we kind of went out with far fewer units, but we also tried to make the units themselves more versatile. Like, they could do multiple things, they could have other things they could do. Then the idea of the transports and other stuff like that, where so again, taking sort of like some of those kernels of ideas that we had in various forms in TA, and like trying to reinterpret them in ways that would make sense in a fantasy world.
And then you have the 4 different factions as well. And so one thing I think Kingdoms does great, like something like Brood War is heralded for its asymmetric factions. Kingdoms, I think, is right up there with it as well. So as you were starting to develop the game, how did both kind of the thematic elements of the 4 factions, as well as kind of balancing and tweaking them, how did that develop over time?
Their basic stuff. I'll hold up that document again. I found this. This is the very first draft of the design document for TA Kingdoms. And I mean, I was a print graphic designer for years before I got into the game industry, so that's why it's laid out a nice type and everything like that. But anyway, as I was saying,
this was free, like, programming and everything. This was all just conceptual, like what you have in your hand.
Yeah, I would say here's the I mean, I've always looked at the design documents as having like 3 lives, and at first they're a roadmap, and then they're a journal, and then they're a history book, because after a point they're not really useful. After a certain point, everything exists in the game, and that's where it should be, right? Not on a piece of paper. But I wanted to get some stuff down, and this is that also talking with the crew and the team and everybody else, and had my original map here. Oh my gosh. There we go. Hey, it's the first map. And you'll notice 2 of the sides have different names. Two of the sides didn't pass legal muster, so we were not allowed to use the original name for Aramon or the original name for Zon. So I kind of coming back to your question, we knew that there were these sort of main thematic things about the sides that we wanted to make sure were consistent or worked out for us, as far as how they were thought of originally and what they were when they were finally finished. And I think that stayed fairly true throughout. The idea that Aramon is the classic castle building, sword wielding knights and things like that, and then the idea that Zon obviously is much more fluid and not as much about fixed fortifications and things like that. And yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it was kind of crazy and risky in a way to just sort of say, yeah, let's just throw out this idea. I mean, any balance TA has is because the sides are roughly equivalent. But that was a thing where we thought, again, it's like, whether it was smart or succeeded or not, we had to try. We had to just feel like we were continuing to advance what we were doing and build on it in some way, not just continue repeating ourselves. So yeah, that was.
Because I mean, I just love it because like you watch like tournament matches these days, and depending on the map, there is certainly an element of personal preference, but people also switch it up based on the map. So you kind of have to know the different sides so that you can play different ones. And especially with something like Zon, like the other three at least, like have those buildings that you can produce from. But with something like Zon, it's just a totally different set of gameplay. And I remember back from when I was playing, it's like either you can play Zon or you can't kind of thing,
Yeah.
So like,
and I think that was the idea that also that there might be different types of player and people who maybe didn't want to all play the same way, and then the personalities of the sides could maybe just be a better sort of spiritual match for some players, and it was again I think I thought it was a worthy goal to try to get something like that into the game, and I think ultimately we did. I mean, it may be obviously the tuning and balancing issues, way more challenging than probably anyone. I mean, we knew that was going to be tough, but yeah, it was that was definitely a kind of an important thing for us.
And then another thing, we've kind of mentioned this, but you did say in your blog and in this interview that you felt TA was a bit criticized for story. So that must have been then more important for you as Kingdoms was developing, is fleshing out a solid story and kind of having the campaign reflect that then.
Yeah, and I think you were also sort of asking. Sorry, I don't know if it's okay to talk about the questions, but the notion of how the story was built and the idea of switching sides on one continuous narrative. Again, I think it's because we wanted to tell a really long, juicy, epic narrative. And we've also noticed that when people basically ally themselves with a faction, that's all they'll do. And we thought, well, we'll have all this other cool stuff, and you also get better at fighting another side if you've played that side. And I think that's also just a better, more balanced way in some ways of just thinking about the sides of the game and just getting a sense of like just really what the game's all about. So that seemed cool. And again, it's also not like we had tons and tons of money. We had enough to do a little more story and some more art than we had in TA, but we had to also think in efficient terms as well. So I thought, oh, that's a cool way to be able to tell like a long story, but not have to tell it 4 times. Yeah.
Cool. One fun thing that was fun for me in developing this interview is we actually got some questions from the community. So as we're talking about the campaign, there were a couple of questions that came up. There were actually a lot of questions that were and a lot of people that were very interested in the story and lore of Kingdoms. So Clay Shaw, for example, asks, what inspired the kind of creation of the story? Or were there any inspirations you drew from? And can you remember, I know this was a while back, but can you remember any pieces that you're personally proud of contributing to the story?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the story. I mean, I wrote the core story for the game, and basically, had really good. My 2 favorite sounding boards were Ron Gilbert, who you cannot beat as someone to brainstorm or tell stories with, and Brian Brown actually. And Brian was the lead programmer. And he would never call himself a creative, but that's what I liked about talking with him is like he would look at everything through like a logical lens, which would sometimes be great because I might think something was really fun or exciting or cool or romantic or whatever, and he could just like cut right through it with his unique viewpoint. So we had some really, really fun story sessions doing that. But I had this sort of outline. I knew we were going to have this idea of sort of like siblings who had these sort of epically bad relationships over many, many, many years. The idea that it's a family story I thought would be really interesting. The sorts of things that influenced the initial plot were, I mean, I've read a lot of fantasy my whole life, and it's been something I've always loved. Obviously, Lord of the Rings is sort of like the bedrock of everything, of playing D&D, of gaming. It's like I think Ron and I have joked that if Tolkien had been like hit by a bus when he was young, there would like be no game industry, you know, because I mean seriously, the things for fantasy, for all of these things that have become like or just taken for granted almost as this sort of, I don't know, fictional underpinning for things. So but also, you know, weirdly, I think I had just read maybe the first book of Fire and Ice.
Oh, really?
I keep thinking it was out around that time because I remember borrowing a friend's copy, and I think yeah. So
because like it's been such a craze recently,
and he's still writing it. So
yeah.
so that's crazy. So I mean, I'd read a few things like that. I was a big fan of Roger Zelazny and other fantasy authors who also would sometimes go off the beaten paths in some interesting ways. And so there was this outline. We knew what we wanted to have happen in each mission. We would sort of spell out what the missions were as far as the functionality. And then we brought in a pro. We brought in actually a TV writer, a guy named Ken Melville. And Ken sat down and we talked through everything. I told him what I was looking for. And he wrote a script. I ended up revising maybe a third of it afterwards, just to sort of he had a really grandiose style, and he also wrote a lot. So it was sometimes a question of like just boiling it down so it was fitting the action of the game a little better, and also just not going on for too long. And then all the casting of the voice talent at a local studio called Studio X in Seattle, and that was really fun. It was just great to have everybody come in and read for us. And talking about that, I was with our producer Kellen Beck for that. And I think we got some very fun, talented people to read for the various parts. And then we had the issue again where we couldn't do full motion video, we couldn't do lots of high-end CG, but we thought, well, let's hire a bunch of artists who can do all kinds of different styles, paintings, and some are going to be like old-fashioned medieval stuff. You've seen the cutscenes. And yeah, I thought, again, working as efficiently as we could and trying to tell the biggest story we could with what we had, I was really happy with how a lot of this stuff turned out.
Yeah. I mean, it's very clear from hearing all the questions that people had about these stories that I think it had its impact. Like, I think that
cool.
I think it came a long way from writing the story of TA in one night,
Yeah. Back of a napkin to we actually had to cast like I forget now, it was like a dozen speaking parts or something like that, and so I was like, that was a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. That's really gratifying to hear, because again, it's like it's like for me it's like almost like the forgotten project, so it's that's awesome to hear.
Yeah. So we had another related question from Ruben Lyon asked, so this story was so well fleshed out. Did you ever consider building it out beyond what was in Kingdoms, like even perhaps like a book or anything like that?
No.
That's a big.
I mean that's really, really flattering, and I think our hope would have been to make more games, to maybe have it take on enough of a life of its own that it would warrant having more of that. And the game actually, not to get into this other topic, but the game did fine. It actually was It did exactly what it needed to do, and it was successful enough that it certainly could have warranted a sequel, actually. But there were bigger issues going on, obviously, with the ownership of GT Interactive and everything else, though. So there was that just was not to be. But really everything we built, though, so to get back to the original question, was to make more games, to be able to. So yeah, we wanted enough of a foundation, enough of a world, enough characters that if we wanted to go somewhere with it, we could, and we did for the one expansion pack for Iron Plague, obviously. So yeah.
Were you, because your titles were lead artist on TA and lead designer on Kingdoms, were you finding yourself like making more of the gameplay decisions in Kingdoms than you were in TA, just going by those titles?
I mean, when it's all said and done, yes, because Humongous Entertainment actually was the company we worked for. Cave Dog was a brand; it was like a label, but like all of our paychecks said Humongous Entertainment for the first few years. And Humongous, being run by Ron, was run by designers. So if you were the lead designer, you controlled everything. You got to approve of all of the advertisements. You got to You just had a lot of say over like what went into the game, over everything, over tech. Producers were great, and they were great organizers, and they would help sort of keep things like shepherded along. But it was design that ultimately was like the final arbiter of everything, which was great and scary if you were trying to ship a game and time was tight, and you had to sort of balance out realities with ambitions and things like that. So coming back to your question though, it was interesting because I also came out of an era when titles were not quite as carefully organized as they are now. So the first games I worked on, there were no designers. There were like the people who were programming and doing art, and then there'd be this sort of like, I guess we'll figure out the game, and I mean, I literally would get like a list of things on a piece of notebook paper at my very first job. It's like, yeah, we want a jungle level and some things with water, and go have fun, I mean, they were small projects, and they were usually done within 4 to 6 months and by 3 or 4 people. But there was no world in which I wasn't doing design work. Except for probably the early days on TA, because obviously you have a lot of people who, we had a lot of art problems to solve. We had a lot of tool problems to solve. But yeah, so I mean, I guess what I'm saying, it was familiar. It was really familiar territory to be designing. And then on TA, I did a lot of design work. I mean, I ended up doing all the UI. I had to do all the flow of the screens. I had to figure out how all the cursors worked. And there were a lot of just day-to-day moments where everyone was really collaborative. We all played the game every single day, and so there's a lot of things flying around. So everyone was really involved in design in a really positive way, and that's a real tribute to Chris that that he cultivated that kind of mindset.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason I asked that is because let's get kind of into the nitty-gritty of the core gameplay of Kingdoms. Mm-hmm. Because there are so many things that Kingdoms does differently from TA. So not to put you on the spot too much, but could you name like 2 or 3 things that you felt like as you started to design Kingdoms, you were just like, this is really going to differentiate it gameplay-wise from what we had in Total Annihilation?
Yeah, I think there were a few things that I thought would be interesting to try or would definitely differentiate the game. And one, which is it was controversial because I think one thing that TA fans love is the sheer number of units. And we set out day one saying, let's not have as many. Let's have the units themselves be more distinctive from each other. I mean, you can only have so many boxes that do things and have them be distinguishable from each other. But when suddenly it's going to be a giant with a club, it's like, well, you know what he does. So the idea that form and function were really different in a world where it's made up science fiction versus fantasy that people have some familiarity with meant the way the units worked and functioned and the way we scripted them would be really, really different. Intentionally putting gaps into those hierarchies too was really our way of leaving room to grow, of making things feel special. And again, back to the idea that, even though we didn't know it at the time that we were running a service, the idea that the sides could change, we could add things, we could tweak things over time, and then people would have to maybe learn and adapt. And the idea that it was a living, breathing thing was something we could make more of a virtue of, because it was great with TA, and there were things happening there that, again, I don't think I'd ever seen with a game before. And so I think we wanted to keep some of those strengths, but maybe sort of underline them a little harder and say, look, this is going to be different in a year or two than it is right now.
Yeah, because I like that you mentioned that you kind of simplified it a bit by removing the sheer number of units. It's kind of interesting the way you tweaked the complexity of the game, because you simplified it by having fewer units, fewer building types, even bringing resources from 2 to 1. But you also kind of made it more complex in some ways. Like, you don't have a unit kind of like that's equivalent to like the Fire Mage or the Weather Witch or like some of Taurus's units that can just make a huge impact. Like, you drop a Weather Witch next to a Monarch and you win the game, if it's not taken out. Whereas I don't know if TA, like you had, the commander had its gun, but I don't know if it had any like single units that could kind of make that same impact besides the commander. So it's kind of like it allowed a lot more kind of like fine-tuned gameplay opportunities, I feel like, which was really cool.
Oh, thanks. That was the goal.
Yeah.
So thanks for noticing.
Yeah. I kind of want to, so I'm interested because the gameplay in multiplayer between TA and Kingdoms is just so different. Like, I didn't know what TA matches were too much like, but it's kind of like it's a lot more. I felt from the matches I found, TA matches are kind of a lot more sporadic battles here and there for the most part, and Kingdoms is just kind of like it's almost like a tug of war on the entire map. At least what the way that multiplayer matches have evolved. So I'm actually curious to hear, like, as you guys started playing in the office, what were your matches of Kingdoms like?
Oh, they were all over the map, and obviously the tuning changed a lot during production. So I think one approach or one trick that might work one week might not the next, and we were constantly, thinking and rethinking and arguing and yelling and screaming and swearing about everything inside the game, but in a good way. It was. It was funny though, because it was a time when there wasn't, like today you would have all kinds of telemetry, right? And you'd know that, oh wow, 9 out of 10 people are doing this in the 11th minute of the game, and we had nothing like that. It was when you think about it, it was a mix of sort of like shooting from the hip and just sort of empirical observation of what we were seeing and hearing and what everyone was saying as we played. I think the tuning and balancing actually took a leap toward the positive when the Boneyards team came online, and they had to start thinking in terms of updates and things that they would be doing after the game was done to make it a more optimal multiplayer experience. And they were able to take, because we were so busy usually making the game, they were able to look at what we had done, and I think through a more objective lens, and do the things that I think that like the Crusades balance and stuff like that were big improvements over like what originally went out the door with Kingdoms.
Do you remember if in your office, because like one of the core gameplay components is just like setting a building to an infinite production and just going to patrol directly into the enemy's base. Do you remember way back when if like that's the kind of way that you guys were playing, or did that kind of evolve with the community?
Yeah, we were doing that.
Because
I mean that's what I like. But I also like the fact that we could interrupt the queue and have it do something temporarily and then go back to the infinite queue. There were some little UI things like that. Also, a lot of us were fans of the full screen mini map. The fact that you could play the game, all of it from there if you really wanted to, is possible. That also means like if you're busy with some minutia somewhere, but you want to go off and check on those units, you play the game. Why am I telling you this? But it was. I think we were doing some of the same things, but again, not as optimally. I think we were way too polite with each other. I think everyone was way too nice to each other when you're on a production team. And I think you never know for sure, obviously, till the game goes out in the wild. And again, that's where leaving a little bit of elbow room on the tuning and balancing and the sort of like role that the units had was helpful. Because I mean, it was the same with TA, where there's this sort of plate spinning thing going on, where something starts to wobble and you go over and and there was a fair amount of that as well as we were sort of continuing to add content and continue to and people just kept playing and getting better at it and spotting exploits and all kinds of crazy stuff that we never would have guessed, and just plain old bugs, things that we didn't see coming. So yeah.
And then there's the idea of the Monarch, which is really used quite differently from how it is in TA, I think. What were you expecting the Monarch to be used for? Because there's so many different things you can use it as.
I mean, they have a lot of the same utility that the commanders have, although I think we were intentionally decided, like, some cannot go through water and some can, and
I think one benefit is just that they move a lot faster, so they can have more kind of map presence.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were thinking in terms of old historical battles, the notion of that there's this inspiring hero, leader, king, or whoever who, like back in the days when they take to the battlefield, and they could shore things up here and they can go over here and they could help out with that. And I think we wanted them to have that kind of just usefulness in the battle. We also wanted to make them hardy enough that people wouldn't be too afraid to use them. And because I know obviously that game over if you lose one, but we like the idea that there was that sense of risk, but it's kind of thrilling, right? If they're going through the heat of battle to do something you really need done, and then they can get back out again, which was a little more difficult with the commanders. They were definitely a little slower. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I just love the way that Monarchs panned out, and there are 3 different like moves that each one has, and the difference between them. Like obviously, Thurcia is totally different from the other 3. It's just really, really cool stuff.
Awesome.
So I guess kind of getting back to the idea of balance and how you guys balanced it. Do you remember anything in particular early on that you kind of occurred to you as like, this is way overpowered or underpowered, we need to buff it or anything like that?
Yeah, there were always things like that. There wasn't anything that really jumps out at me that I can actually remember with any clarity. I know there was always the concern about when something had either too much mobility and a little too much firepower. Everyone remembers other areas where we didn't expect people to take the blimps from Varuna and
right. That's what I was hoping you would say. Actually, dirigibles was
and that was also kind of like a system horsepower exploit, because people with really good computers could do it. And people with really shitty ones, unfortunately, would be just watching a slideshow and be really unable to play. And that's funny, because that was Kingdom's version of the brawler rush, right? Where the problem with the brawlers wasn't the polygons. The problem was all the little particles coming out of the guns. Each got a separate like system packet or something. And for like the guy doing the network code had never done network code. And he was a really brilliant guy, but he hadn't done that thing. And we did not expect people to send hundreds of them at somebody and just kill someone. So again, the person with the better bandwidth could win. There's always going to be stuff like that, and that stuff always comes out in the wash when you launch a game out in the wild and everyone gets a chance to play it. And just people are always constantly surprised, kind of like commander napping. Again, those were things that they're like, what? People are picking up the commanders, and then self-destructing. Well, that's not. I mean, it's funny. It never occurred to us to try that, even though it was 100% possible. Again, I think people who work on games together are often too nice to each other. So, yeah.
Game designers need to grief each other a bit more,
They do. I mean, we would do all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And I'm being a little bit dramatic with that. There are people who are really mean in the office matches. But overall, though, people have certain habits and tendencies when they play that you can learn. You really don't really see what you've got until that gets scaled up into thousands and thousands of people, I'm going to have another sip of my slightly cold coffee. It's delicious.
Yeah, those dirigibles, that was the first big balance change. I think that might have been in 2.0. Like that was one of the big balance changes.
Yes. We also reduced the polygon count quite a bit.
I see. Of dirigibles specifically? Yes. Okay, so that's why the sprite changed. Like in my mind, it was just because like it almost felt like a different unit just because it was so different. But no, that was the reason. Okay.
Yeah, they just blew out the polygon budget, and again we thought, well, no one's going to build 100 of these. Of course they did. Yeah. So yeah.
And then 3.0 came along, where it just almost changed the gameplay, because if I remember before that, people didn't often build like a tier up. At least not for kind of just the generic melee or ranged units. If they did, it was for either divine lodestones or for like those special units like weather witches, or like with that actual kind of utility. So what were you seeing, I guess, that made you think we have to make tier 3 units stronger? We have to kind of make these buildings more resistant.
My feeling was that, I mean, I could be wrong.
Right.
What I seem to recall, though, is people were getting through matches without using very many units, and or advancing or upgrading, or letting the stuff really using the full extent of what there was on offer, I guess, strategically. So I think there was some sense that we had to tweak those values so people could march up the tech tree a little faster and get to those cool, fun, juicy endgame units a little more easily than they could otherwise. That's my only recollection of that. That was it was a little weak, because again, people could find some level 1, basic first tier units that were very, very effective, and if you made enough of them, you could definitely, So yeah, it was. I remember that being.
Like I watch matches now, and as long as the map as long as it's like maybe larger, or if it just kind of has the need for it, people like build the higher tier units. So it's cool to see that diversity. And then sometimes you just don't need to, based on what the map is. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
3.0 also released the Darien Crusades, which honestly is my favorite part. I don't think I wish that took off more than it did. I really do. When I say Divine Crusades, I don't mean like the balance. I mean like the Boneyards,
Yeah.
like feature. So I guess could you talk a bit about the development of that?
Yeah. I mean, we only helped on the implementation side as far as the content and the units, but the actual infrastructure and then the design of how that worked it was very much in collaboration with the Boneyards team, and they were run as sort of a separate unit. And with the idea with Boneyards was that was going to eventually turn into our BattleNet. So the idea that once the other games came out, that they too would use it, and we'd have this awesome multiplayer service that had all these cool games. And so they were the ones who, I remember they presented the idea of having this sort of tournament style thing where they have, all these hierarchies and leaderboards and other cool stuff. And the way they sliced and diced again, that I thought was very, very forward looking as far as how that worked. And yeah, I should say that the full credit there goes to the Boneyards folks. They that and the Crusades. The cut rebalance of the game was very much through the lens of what they were trying to do, again, to be a viable online service.
So that's interesting. So you guys were two different teams. What kinds of topics? This is one, but what kind of topics would you need to communicate with each other, or was it mostly like so independent? Like, how often did you go to the Boneyards team to talk?
Oh, they were just a few doors away, on the same floor as we were. So it was a pretty easy thing to go to. And several of them had worked either on TA or had been in the QA department on TA or and Kingdoms, both. So they had a lot of familiarity with the game. They had a lot of familiarity with its sort of like weaknesses and strengths and things like that. So they were never difficult conversations, and they would feel very strongly about the tuning of certain things and then the role of certain units. I'm sorry, and then they did a lot to advance the game and evolve the game and balance the game in ways that I thought were super, super good. They really benefited the project. hugely. Yeah, I agree. If only they could have continued onward, because I think there were some very cool ideas in there.
Yeah. I absolutely love Daring Crusades, and I was a part of Terror, which wound up winning. So.
Oh well.
I can't.
Did you interact very much with like their community managers from?
Not that I remember. I honestly don't remember doing that. Yeah, I don't think so. Unfortunately, I just played a lot. But so we had Boneyards, and then at the same time we had M-Player actually. So I'm curious, like, what was it like having your community spread across two sites?
It didn't really impact us a whole lot over where I was working, because like after Kingdoms came out and Boneyards was underway and they were working on stuff and actively updating content, we were working on the download units and on Iron Plague. So we would stay kind of over in production mode, which was very heads down kind of thing. And we had really limited interaction. Definitely Boneyards and the Boneyards team, we were very aware of what that community was saying and what was going on there. And their message boards and everything were all very integrated with ours, so we got to see a lot of stuff. M-Player, it was like it was like that was just somewhere else. They'd come around obviously to the Cave Dog message boards, but they weren't necessarily something that we felt like we weren't really heavily involved with that.
Because I'm thinking about it, even back then, I think most people felt like Boneyards was the better experience. I forget why I personally, because at first I stuck to M-Player. I think there were technical difficulties. I honestly can't remember why I personally played it on M-Player more than Boneyards. But yeah, I almost feel like it might have behooved you guys if, obviously, if more people stuck to Boneyards and you guys had the because they hosted so many games, whereas you guys were able to cater to Kingdom specifically and say have this many games and you'll get this special icon and stuff like that, which was really a lot of fun. But yeah, I guess this might be a question for the Boneyards team themselves, but do you remember kind of how you guys decided what the ranking system would be like for those like special little ranks and icons?
No, I just remember the system being kind of like presented to me as like, there's this thing we want to do, and we thought, oh, that sounds really cool, let's do that. So there wasn't a lot of process behind the ideas and the conversations, but I just remember the Boneyards guys had some really buttoned up thinking about that, and they had some really strong ideas.
Yeah.
And I mean, and Ron was in the room, and he had very strong opinions about all those things too. And it was a good group of people actually who all had, I think, a lot of good input on that stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I remember like there were, like I said, there are all these different symbols. So anytime you had like a Tyros gold shield in the chat room, like you knew you were in the presence of someone super cool. That really made the game. Yeah, I enjoyed that ranking system a lot, and the same goes for the Daring Crusades ranking system. Yeah, it's really really fun stuff, and I do wish Boneyard stuck around so that you guys could do that for other games as well. And then since then,
we didn't lack for ambition. It was
yeah.
I mean, again, a thing like M-Player also benefits from having a bunch of games, you know, and I think you have a service like that. That's one thing you have to do is feed it content, and we could only feed it so much so fast. So yeah, I mean, that was obviously all rolled up in all the stuff there that happened with that place.
And then since then, you've had Game Spy, which was I played even back then in those days, and then Game Ranger more recently. Like, this is kind of one of the key questions I feel like in talking to you, but did you ever expect the game to last this long?
No, not at all. not even. I mean, you hope people will play it, and I'd heard that people do play. I guess, you know, I'm not, you know, but I'm still. I'm always astonished though when the people playing it have such a vibrant community still, and are so actively interested in it, not just in sort of an ironic retro way. So you know, it's I mean, just given how many games there are and how many come out every year, that anyone makes the time to work to play something that you built maybe 20 or more years ago. I'm always astonished and gratified and amazed when I hear that. Always.
I'd be interested. I kind of wish I was still part of the community, because I'd be interested in knowing like how many people had been playing it on and off all this time, or how many people were finding it for the first time. That would be cool to find out.
Yeah. I don't know.
There's certainly for me like that nostalgia effect of like seeing these games played that I remember from way back when. But honestly, it's also just a good game. So I could see people just getting into it for the first time. One cool thing that Kingdoms did, and Total Annihilation did as well, which we talked out a bit about, is these new unit releases kind of during the lifespan of the game. Is that just something you always knew that you wanted to do? Like, what value when you seeded that? Did you see in that?
Yeah, it's funny. One of my favorite memories on Total Annihilation, it would be just about every morning after I got to this room it's about the size of this room, where Chris and I worked on the game. It's before we had a team, but there was always the morning chat with Ron, and Ron would come over to our doorway, and he'd stand in the doorway, and he would talk for a while, and we would brainstorm a bit, or he'd have some idea or something he thought about. Chris would have maybe the same. So these little sort of drive-by brainstorms that he did were super, super pivotal. I mean, infinite, if it was just shift click, download units, all those things all came out of those conversations. And I remember Chris was saying, yeah, we could probably just do one unit and just have that added to the game. And we could, and we can put it up on a website and people could download it. And I think it was Ron who was like, and we could do one a week. But we were all excited, and we thought, yeah, it's one unit. How hard can that be? We had no idea. But at the same time, it was, I mean, that was a very early thing. We were still in the very early prototype stages. We had maybe our first tile set just as a prototype in the game with some, pixel trees, little 20 polygon tanks. And I think it was around that time that, the doorway conversation about download units occurred. And that was, that was one of those things that really made the game stand out. The fact that, hey, here's more stuff, here's more units, here's more things, and they're free. It was one of those things where, again, maybe we took it for granted, but the Cave Dog site kept getting these notifications every week that we were one of the top 100 websites in the world.
Really? I had no idea about that.
We had upwards of 12 million downloads of some of those download units. That was the peak at one point. It was funny because we didn't sell anywhere near that number of games, but it was a thing where we, again, today, people would, that would be a, jaw-droppingly like, what, but Yeah. The unique visits per day to the Cave Dog site, especially the days we posted new units, were routinely above like 6-7 million hits in a day.
And it must have been fun for you guys because it wasn't just like maintaining a game, patching a game. It was also creating new content, which I mean, I've never been in the industry myself, but I could imagine like just isn't the case sometimes. Sometimes you release that game and then like if it's multiplayer, you just have to like maintain it, work or like fix the bugs, etc. But this allows new content creation, which must have been fun for you guys.
It was definitely fun. Yeah, we really enjoyed it. I think again we underestimated because yes, the units themselves are mechanically not super hard to make, but when you think about them in terms of the tapestry of all the existing content and the role they could have or the impact they could have, and then by the time you build them and script them and texture them and test them out and make sure they're not going to break anything in the game too badly. Then it's they were so we never hit that once a week thing. But they came out at a pretty good clip for a while, as you may know, and it was fun. It was fun to have more things to work on. It was fun to be able to like address things as well. Like sometimes like hey, where's all your radar units? Well, with Kingdoms, obviously one of the very first ones was the lighthouse, which is like basically a radar tower, but there were things like that we knew we would probably want to do based on feedback and based on just sort of like the idea that those gaps we left were kind of intentional, and so the download units could have some real impact.
Cool. So I had a couple of questions about the Iron Plague expansion as well, actually. So similar to what I was asking about, you have Total Annihilation. How did the idea of Kingdoms develop? Now you have Kingdoms. How did the idea of the Iron Plague develop?
It's funny that I was saying that we got tired of robots and we wanted to go to do fantasy for a while, but then it was like, let's go back to doing robots. No, it wasn't quite that. I think the idea of that kind of, clockwork Renaissance kind of stuff, we just thought that would be just really, really cool. I also felt like we'd left that one aspect of the story kind of like hanging as this sort of like, oh, what happened to Garacaius? Oh no, so the idea that he went off and started sort of like a technical paradise that sort of like forsakes magic. It was, I thought, fun. So yeah, I mean, it was really just more of a let's just sit down and figure out what he did, and we kicked around some ideas, and there were enough people who just loved that kind of aesthetic, the idea of the Da Vinci flying machines and that kind of stuff, that we thought it would be just really interesting. That again, back to your asymmetrical comment, just something that's really different from the other factions in a way that really stands out. And I think some of the best unit work we had was in Iron Plague. There's some really beautiful units in that game.
A question that, sorry, let me get the name here. Alistair Main asked was there any content that you had? Well, the way he asked, what was the original plan for the latter parts of the Iron Plague campaign? Which I kind of interpret as, did you need to cut any content in order to release it on time? Did you have any risks in terms of releasing it?
Not really, no. I mean it's basically what we set out to make. I think it was all the missions were there that we intended to make. There might have been some mixing and matching and trying things out, because there's always a bit of that when you're making missions. There'll be some that maybe don't work out, and some are stronger than others, and they might change in the order depending on like what you want to do with the story. But we had to lock the story and get all of the the narration and all the other little odds and ends that go with that done pretty early. So that we didn't really have a lot of options to not finish what we'd started with Iron Plague.
Gotcha.
At least that's what I remember. At least I don't think. There are always things on the drawing board that don't make it in. There's always things that again, like we might try things out and go, that didn't work. But usually that's going to be on a more granular level. It could be an individual, it might be a unit. It might be the way we're doing some sort of other asset in the game. But overall, though, like the overall big picture was pretty much what we set out to do.
And do you feel like that's the case for Kingdoms proper itself? Because let's see, Andrew Danny Taylor asked, was there anything left out of the game, and if so, why?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I think we scoped it in a way that made sense, that we so we could finish it. We didn't leave a whole lot of stuff on the drawing board. We certainly had more sort of broken, non-functional things that we had to like cut last minute out of like TA than there was for Kingdoms. And I think that part of that was the benefit of having a smaller unit list and having the roles of those units feel like they were trying at least to fit together like a jigsaw that made some sort of sense. We didn't always succeed at that, but I think that sort of scoping definitely helped us when it came to like finishing it. So I mean, I'll say that, you know, I mean, it's pretty much what we wanted to build. I mean, yes, things can always be better, and of course, you know, you could polish things forever, and we had to, you know, both of the Total Annihilation games. I mean, we worked really, really hard. We crunched many months on both titles, and so you could say, yeah, if it had had a little more time to bake, you know, and obviously we could have always have done more balancing and tuning and bug fixes and things like that. But yeah, I mean, overall though, I'm really proud of what the team accomplished. And it's funny looking at all this stuff again. Like I said, I haven't looked at it nearly enough. I feel kind of guilty now because it feels like an abandoned child, and I look at it and it's like, you know, and I saw these. I have documents. I have. Oh, hey, here's what we have here. They have very first printout of the Cave Dog logo.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I remember from your blog you said that. So it was either going to be Cave Dog or what was the other name?
Oh yeah, Frozen Yak.
Right, Frozen Yak.
Yeah, because everyone was into like crazy fun names for game studios in the 90s, and this is funny. You can tell me which see it. Is that upside down or is that right side up? Oh, that's upside down. There, it's the world of Darien. So that's the first drawing I did of it that became the basis for the map that you see all the time.
Can you hold it up once more, just kind of centered on the camera?
Yeah, it's not labeled
yeah.
anywhere. This is the original sort of topography of the main game world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fun. See, I had those various sketches and drawings. I think this is on my blog, but yeah, it's just some of the storyboards for the TA intro.
Uh-huh. Oh.
So the stuff for the initial logo pullback, you know, where you see the battlefield and all that stuff. And oh man, I have so much crazy stuff I found. This is just so fun. Oh yeah, wow. And these are original. This is what the unit drawings look like for TA. I don't know if you can see the lines. Is it faded out?
Yeah. Oh, it's coming through. Yeah.
There you go. So yeah, I mean the unit artists were traditional artists. They were just learning 3D for the very first time. So usually they would draw a schematic like that for our little units. We also had to make sure the polygon count was not too high. Usually we tried to keep them under 100 polygons. Funny. No, it's been really fun to dig through this stuff and find all these things and these old artifacts of the stuff.
I'm glad you held on to it. It's really fun. And you posted so much of the TA stuff on your site. I think it's been a bit since you made a blog post, but would you be willing to post some Kingdom stuff on your blog?
I will, yeah. And I apologize. I actually have a whole bunch of backup discs that have like the original scans of a bunch of the artwork that's in the cinematics, which we called the Book of Darien. I've got a lot of just so much material on those that are on a spindle somewhere in my attic over here. So I will dig those out and I will do more posts about Kingdoms.
Love it.
I promise.
So I do have quite a few more questions. Are you okay on time? If we,
I am. I'm just going to keep sipping water here, and I can talk as long as you like.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I think we did post. That we did take questions from the community. I would say the second most popular question is about about the lore and the story. But the first most popular question by far is there any possibility of a sequel coming out?
Oh wow. I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to say. I mean, I feel like Total Annihilation in particular has had a number of spiritual successors over the years. I mean, if you look at Chris's work on Supreme Commander, if you look at some of the old Cave Dog crew that went on to work with Chris, went on to do Planetary Annihilation and stuff like that. So I mean, there are I mean, Kingdoms has never had that to quite the same extent. I'm guessing though that the current owners of the IP must be Wargaming, since they own Total Annihilation now. So it would be kind of up to them.
That's not Iron Plague. That's intellectual property, IP.
Oh, yeah, funny. Yeah. IP. Yeah, see, you can tell I've been working at a big game publishing corporation for too many years now that I'm dropping acronyms like, oh, yeah, everyone, yeah. Business. But yeah, the yes. Anyway, so yeah, Wargaming owns it. I guess it would be up to them if they wanted to do anything with the Kingdoms IP. Um, yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, I have no
Really,
idea. I haven't given it serious thought. I mean, I think everyone came out of that just because we all just killed ourselves, just worked so hard making those games. That it and then after again 20 years and so many other projects, it's sort of like the idea that it's sort of I'm always thinking about the next thing I'm doing or the games I'm working on now, and so it's like I would love to do that, but it also would it feel like this weird visitation from the past? Would it be a little awkward? It's hard to say. Need some water.
So I have a few kind of shorter questions.
Okay.
Each answer may not be more like they might not take more than like 10 seconds at most, but
okay.
But do you have a favorite faction to either play or story wise?
Varuna.
Yes. Gotcha. Most overpowered faction, you think?
Possibly. Oh wow. No, yeah. Well, it's funny. I was reading our crappy strategy guide today. And I forgot how bad it was because those go out months before you finish the game. So like all the advice is like,
okay, you mean like published, like printed?
Yeah, here, yeah, this guy.
Who's the publisher?
Oh, it's one of those companies, GW Press.
Gotcha. I was showing you before
for the very best in game strategy guides. GW. No, it's not good. and their advice is to kill Thirsher right away with lock-in, or you will lose. It's like, oh, that's great advice. So
yeah,
sorry, it was. Sorry, I didn't have a point there. Apart from like, is there a side that's OP? Well, I mean, yeah, there's always going to be. I think there's going to be some wrinkle or exploit. I think again, people have played for more years and have probably much better depth of understanding now than we ever could have had. So whatever I thought I remembered will not be valid. It will not relate to the current state of things as far as how people play Kingdoms. So I'm going to pass on choosing an OP faction.
Cool, sounds good. Those two questions I forgot to mention. Those two questions were from Paul Malinowski. Next question: do you have any favorite units, just visually in particular?
Oh wow. Love the dragons. Those were fun. We put a lot of work into those, and even just having the splines that they create when they turn, so they match the animation reasonably well for something that's just a handful of polygons. I think they actually look great. I love tracking them, even when I'm not really like I should be paying attention to the game. But oh, look at the dragon! They're cool. They're fun to look at. I thought those worked out pretty well. I'd say second to that, though, close second, are just about any large ship. I'm a sucker for the whole nautical thing.
Yeah,
and
because a lot of the maps weren't too like water based. I think, and a lot of the maps that have become popular, like Sewers of Elam, for example, are mostly land based. And I mean, they have enough room kind of for water units, especially kind of with Mer warriors, the ones that can go through water, kind of can make use of a lot of cool maps. But actually, the Sewers of Elam in particular. That was always a cool map and a popular one. I don't know to what extent you were involved in map design, but Sewers is very asymmetric as well, and yet kind of I think to my recollection is pretty balanced. So is there any kind of thought that went into like map design or anything like that? Because it's not like most of them aren't like total mirror images of each other. So I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we would look at layouts and we would try to get something out there that felt reasonably fair because there's obviously a certain amount of randomness as far as where you're placed. But we wanted to make sure there was a likelihood that people would feel like even if things were not exactly the same as every other corner or every other part of the map, that part of that was to look nice.
Yeah.
But part of that also was to maybe put just a little bit of something that so it's that we wanted people to make some sort of maybe interesting tactical choice if there was something a little different about that little part of the map that they were in. It didn't always work out again, but we liked that idea. We liked the notion that, oh, I have a little waterway here. I guess I can do something with that. Versus the idea that well, there's these cliffs or a plateau. What can I do with those? And I mean, that also went back to the use of elevation. Also figured very heavily into a lot of our multiplayer maps. We had that in Total Annihilation, but it was super, super subtle. You really only appreciated the elevation in TA on the super, super high plateaus. But we made the actual ranging and the line of sight and everything from the hills way more pronounced in Kingdoms. And I think that also influenced those multiplayer map designs. So the idea that I have a hill, that means a lot. I mean, that's super important as well. So I don't know. It was a mix of things where we just didn't want them to look too mechanical, but we also wanted there to be a certain amount of fairness. So we tried to balance all that out somehow with this stuff when we were.
Yeah, actually, I like that you mentioned that how important kind of taking the high ground is in Kingdoms as opposed to TA, because I think for one thing, because melee units are so much more popular in Kingdoms than in Total Annihilation. I think if I remember, there aren't even that many in Total Annihilation.
Just everything's ranged. Yeah.
So having something on a hill is so important. Having that extra view. So yeah, I mean, I think that wound up being really well done. Just having that the differences in kind of taking the high ground and the impact therein.
Well, thanks.
Here's a quick question: have you ever had a deity appear random?
We did when we were testing it ourselves, but again, I think we were too polite.
Gotcha.
So people tended to last toward late game stages that I think were far, far, far less common in the wild. So yeah, and I think that was almost because let's see what happens when the deity shows up. The idea that there's a showstopper, be all, end all, if you want to call it whatever Kingdom's version of a Krogoth is, that was kind of the idea that well, you've been playing for a while. Let's mix it up a little. But with that understanding, yeah, I know they do not turn up with great regularity.
I remember I was just playing the AI, but one of the first things I did in that game I remember is I played on a 4-player map. I stole a unit from each side. I created the tier 3 builders on each side, or tier 4, and just waited for a deity, but none ever came up. And then finally, randomly, in some game I was playing with just a friend, he had one and then just destroyed me with it. So that was my one deity appearance that I will never forget.
Yeah, that's what they're supposed to do. I don't know if it was a great idea, but we thought it was fun.
Cool. Are there any random Easter eggs that you can remember putting into the game that maybe people would have come up found by now or not? But anything like that?
Not a whole lot. I mean, there were. I know the Zon unit acknowledgement sounds are mostly names of my family members said with a wacky accent.
Oh, really?
Yes. But,
it gets more Easter eggy than
I don't think we had a lot else hiding in there. I mean, I know there's got to be some stuff under the hood and some things that are in some of the units, and I thought maybe there might have been some stuff rendered into some of the John Barron. He did a lot of the Varuna background tile sets. I remember he put some stuff into some of those shell patterns and stuff that are so beautiful in the water and things. And I can't remember what he did. There was some little there's a Cave Dog logo I had in somewhere. I know you.
Sure really?
Yeah.
Right. As soon as this interview goes out.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's something. I want to think it's one of the missions maybe, but there's some stuff like that. I know that's lurking in there. I hadn't even thought of that. Wow, look what you're doing to my brain.
I feel like this interview is going to be released and everyone's going to go map hunting for the Cave Dog logo hidden.
In there somewhere.
Yeah.
I tell you what, if I'll send a T-shirt to someone who finds it.
Yeah, nice.
I found a bunch of Cave Dog T-shirts today. Still in the bag, brand new.
Mint condition.
Yeah.
So next we have a question from Hair General, which I am super stoked to hear about. So after all these years, kind of what is your vision of Kingdoms? Kind of looking back, how do you feel about the journey of this game that you created and designed? Wow, that's a really great question. I mean, it's a thing where
we put a lot of, sweat and tears into making it, and we had some goals for what we wanted the game to be. We had some goals for how we thought it could be played while keeping what we felt were, at least some of the great strengths of Total Annihilation. But, it was a thing where, like I said earlier, I think had it been allowed to be its own title, I think perhaps some of that work we did, some of the ways we advanced things, we did, I think, some really cool things for the RTS genre, full stop. But it's really hard to get around, the things that precede something, especially when it's something as impactful as Total Annihilation. So I guess, like I said, I feel like I feel like it would have been great to separate those things so they could both be celebrated, because I think they're both really good games. And I wasn't entirely joking about the idea of the red-haired stepchild or whatever, because it often does feel that way. And I feel like, looking at the work and looking at the things and talking about it with you again today, I was like, oh yeah, there's some really good stuff in there. But it's also a thing where you do move on, you do build other things, you get concerned with other stuff. I've had 1,000 other dramas on a bunch of other titles with a bunch of other teams since then. So it's in a way also like something where I look back with pride. I'm really proud of the game. I'm really proud of the team. I think we accomplished something really great. But it's also a thing where there have been so many things that I would have done so many things differently, just because I have 20 more years experience as a game designer now. Right. So it's, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. I see Chris now and then, and we'll talk about stuff like that. He lives like less than a mile from my house. He's like, I'm pointing that way because his house is right over there, less than a mile away.
Are you still in Washington?
What's that?
Are you in Washington?
Oh yeah. Woodinville, Washington.
Yeah.
So yeah. I almost drive by his house every day on my way to work. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I don't know. So I think we're both amazed. We're both astonished that 20 plus years there are still people playing the game and appreciating the game. And I don't know if that's I don't know if that covers all my range of feelings, but that's that's most of it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm not just trying to flatter you here. It's definitely something to be like. It's such an awesome game. Like I said, I appreciate good game design and asymmetric game design, and Kingdoms is right up there with a lot of the greats in terms of like being able to achieve that. And it's so cool, like the campaign itself, what multiplayer matches are capable of, the Boneyards design and all that. Just really cool stuff. And actually, that brings me into my next question from Sage, who's actually one of the people who helped coordinate this interview. He's one of the Facebook the Kingdom's Facebook admins. He's one of the community forum admins, and actually even been working on. He's the lead designer of an expansion project called The New Era, which is really. But he wanted to know. So the Kingdom's Facebook community has over 1,300 members. I don't know how many active, but I mean that's a pretty staggering amount. If like the community's kind of always been in search of this great multiplayer platform. If the community wanted to bring Boneyards back, what do you feel like it would take to do so?
Oh, wow.
Boneyards proper, we're talking about.
Wow. I mean, it would just putting on the evil corporation hat for a moment. It would probably have to be its own standalone other service of some kind. It would have to be able to, I mean, getting the bits and stuff. I know like a lot of the source code and a lot of the bits and everything for the original game, they're out there. I know a lot of the fan community has them.
Oh, okay, got it.
So, but it might be a little different with Boneyards because that was server tech, that was server side stuff, and I don't know if there's a way to. I don't think there can't be an easy way to resurrect that code base or the functionality. It would have to be sort of like being able to just set up a new thing all in. I mean, and it's funny. Is there currently no way beyond LAN to play?
Well, there's Game Ranger, and that's the main way.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Yeah, you mentioned that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No worries. Yeah. But Boneyards, I think, has just always been like the number one. After all this time, just like wish we could have it from ladder system to just like
the map and the
map. Because I know that actually people do play it on land still, but I know that they're like obviously that has inconveniences.
But the persistence is what you're talking about, and the meta,
right, exactly.
as well. So yeah, I don't know. You'd have to get if you wanted those bits or you wanted that art, you'd have to probably get permission from the current lords and masters of the intellectual property. So I don't know what would be involved in that, because I'm not really very well versed in like how would you bootstrap a matchmaking multiplayer service with a rich meta into existence. It would be really cool. It was in its own right as big an undertaking as building Total Annihilation or building Kingdom, because they had a large team, they had big ambitions, they had big plans. So I know they built a lot of stuff with the expectation that oh boy, we'll have all these other games. So I don't know. I really don't know. It's an interesting thing to mull over, mentally, but it would take probably a bunch of money and lawyers. I guess is my short answer. Yeah.
Understand.
And we know how fun that is.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I mean, so we're kind of starting to close up, but I also just wanted to kind of hear a bit about what you've been working on since all those days. What have been some of your favorite games that you've put out there?
Oh gosh, let's see. After Cave Dog, I went and started my own studio, and I ran it for 8 years. And we did a first party game, character platformer of all things, the completely opposite end of the swimming pool from real time strategy. And that was a game called Voodoo Vents. And after that, I think I made 7 or 8 more games with Ron Gilbert. They were mostly like puzzle games and mobile games and things like that. I did those for quite a while. In 2009, I went to work, actually 2007, I should say, I went back to work with Chris. And I got there just as Supreme Commander was launching. I was there through the first expansion, and then
you heard word of Supreme Commander earlier. Had you wanted to be a part of that, or were you like?
Oh, I'd been by guest powered and saw the stuff going on, and there was that little bit of a there was a little bit of PTSD mixed with this looks so great though, but it looks so great. Yeah. And they had a really fun office, in Redmond over there, and so yeah, I'd stop by for lunch and I'd see what they were up to, and it was like, oh man, it was, and it's funny because I'd been working on again mobile games and other things for a while, and those were a lot of fun to work on, but there was that bit of like, oh, I kind of miss going to an office. Mm-hmm. I like seeing people. I like you show up and you sit down at your desk with your coffee and you do your, it's like there's the whole routine of going to work with a group that is you can't replace it. And yeah. I've worked on a ton of titles where everyone works remotely. We do really good work. I really enjoy it, but there is that thing though where there's the collaboration, there's the directness of everything, there's that accountability you get when you can see everybody all day, which is going to be it's hard to replicate. With as good as remote working tools are now. And yeah. So anyway, that was like, yeah. So I went back to, we worked with Chris for 2 years in gas power. But then after that, I went to Microsoft. I've been there ever since. But while at Microsoft, I've been doing my own indie games and things like that. I re-released Voodoo Vents a couple of years ago, just did my own sort of independent version of just, it's funny talking about the old, Cave Dog stuff, because this was a thing where I had to resurrect an old code base, and old rendering code and stuff that was written in assembly 16 years ago, and hiring a team to get it all running again so we could relaunch it was really, really interesting. It was like doing archaeology work on stuff, because there was just methodologies that just aren't used anymore for some of that stuff. And there are also some kind of boneheaded things in how we built things the first time. So
is that out now, or is that your current project?
No, that was 2 years ago now. So okay. No, I'm working on a new game right now. Probably going to announce it later this fall. It's just a like little ID at Xbox, little indie game kind of thing. So it's just fun, cute, wacky stuff with little shooty guns in it. So yeah,
nice.
Yeah, fun. Yeah. I'll keep you posted.
Cool, please do. Are there any just favorite games in general that you've played? Just
gosh,
of all.
Oh wow! I'd say in the last 5 years, Breath of the Wild.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I love that game. Yeah, yeah. I played it to death. I love that game. It's just the right mix of good system design, beautiful realization, awesome mechanics. It just hits. It just punches a lot of buttons for me. So that's definitely right up there for me right now. And trying to think of anything more recent. Sorry, what?
Did you play the very original Legend of Zelda?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah, I mean that is honestly one of my, that and A Link to the Past for SNES are my two favorite Zelda games, and I'm so glad that, because Zelda 1 was so open ended, so it's so nice that Breath of the Wild kind of got back to those roots.
It definitely had that feeling. I mean, although I am still a sucker for Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
That was the first time, I think it was during the day-night cycle where you're off in some remote area and the sky's shifting color and you hear like birds twittering and I feel like, yeah, I'm only looking at maybe 7 polygons at this mountain peak, but you have this magical feeling of being transported, and I feel like that's one of the superpowers games has, is to transport you and make you feel like you're somewhere else or someone else, and it's the best. It's so good. So yeah.
So
can't go wrong with it. Can't go wrong with the Zelda.
Very cool. Well, I think that's about everything I had. Thank you so much for your time. Before we close out, is there anything else you wanted to like talk about or bring up or anything like that?
I can't think of anything. I think I'm good. Yeah. I'm gonna go watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood finally. So I'm.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see that.
I didn't get to see that one yet, but
I'm bracing myself. I mean, I'm sure it'll be great.
Next question: favorite Tarantino movie?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Tarantino movie? We talked about. Do you have a favorite Tarantino movie?
Wow. I lean toward like the Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs side, like his earlier stuff sometimes. Yeah, I'd go with that for now. I go with I go with Pulp Fiction.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. But well, yeah, Clayton, thank you so much for your time. On behalf of the entire Kingdom community, it's been awesome to be able to chat with you about this stuff. Thank you. I'm glad you remember it so well in such great detail. Like reading your blog has been a lot of fun. Again, once more, that's tonofclay.blogspot. I got that right. There's some dashes in there, but if you search,
I forget, but it'll turn up.
Yeah. Really fun read there. Thank you also to Clay Shaw and Sage, who helps set up and coordinate this interview. And yeah, I think that just about does it all. So and thank you also to the Kingdoms community for all your questions. We tried to get as many out there as possible. If you want to be more involved in Kingdoms and you're not, then you can either visit the Total Annihilation Kingdoms Facebook page, the Total Annihilation Reddit, or the forums at kingdoms.catsboard.com. Clayton, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very, very welcome. And I liked the Kingdoms group on Facebook today. So
there you go.
So feel free to ask questions there if you have any more things you want to talk about.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Right. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
You're welcome. It was really a pleasure. Thank you so much. This is so great.